I guess I want to start by saying a few things in terms of our analysis from forms my remarks. Is that African black people, you're going to hear me say African and black interchangeably because that's how I see it. We're African people, and in this country, we're colonized. We constitute a domestic colony. So that means that everything, every characteristic, every fundamental relationship that you can define between these, and I would like to go back to that because at that same time, what Joe talked about is there was a concept like I guess I could call it a revolutionary consciousness, or at least a consciousness of resistance, even among people who were enlisted in war. That, to me, it seems like that has disappeared. And we have black people in this country, and this is what we have to attack, because a lot of it is an ideological war too. We have to kind of attack the fundamental premises that we've been indoctrinated to. So now we can be enlisted in war in the U.S. military and then go and kill our sisters and brothers in Africa or someplace else. And I think John he's going to talk a little bit more about AFRICOM and whatnot. But I want to talk about how AFRICOM is a counterpart to what is known as the 1033 program. People who may not be understand this is a act. Legislation that helps the transfer of equipment, military-grade equipment from the Department of Defense into local law enforcement. And so this is the militarization of police forces that are primarily used in black and brown communities around this country to keep us in line. Now, this is not the beginning of the militarization of the police. The beginning of it, we can go back as far as what Joe was talking about, that era, and we know them as SWAT. They make all kind of television programs. They still make television programs around SWAT. And that was the beginning of it. And if we have to understand that the first operations of SWAT, just like on the African continent, were to take down the liberation movements. In 1969, I believe the first operation of SWAT was a standoff, a 4-hour standoff between the Black Panther Party and SWAT. And this is what this is why they came about, not because of anything else. You can imagine what other purpose would a militarized police force need. And they formalized it in the 1033 program, which was in 1990, and actually not just formalized it, increased it, made it more sophisticated, solidified the cooperation between the Department of Defense and the police forces in 1997, I believe. It was the Clinton administration. And then, so now we're looking at that. The same, most people probably know about the COINTELPRO, the counterintelligence program of the FBI that was used to undermine social justice movements, notably the Black Panther Party and the American Indian movement. Well, the same thing was happening on the African continent with the CIA, overthrowing governments, all this kind of stuff. There's been a war against African people. I mean, if now we're taught through school that quote-unquote we share the same interests of America, that we're quote-unquote American. You can use the term African-American. I myself think that it's pretty much an oxymoron. The policies that really look at our country domestically and foreign policy means that what Americanism means is diametrically opposed to our interests. And we're taught things in history and everything that we share the same interest as what is Americanism. And I'm not trying to disparage anybody, but we have to really think about the underpinnings and presumptions that we're indoctrinated into. So we fast forward, now we have AFRICOM, we have the 1033 program, we have people who are thinking, who are like indoctrinated so much that they'll join the military and think nothing of being deployed to Africa. You know, we heard not too long ago about the young man, I'm sorry I can't remember his name, who was killed in Niger. And people didn't even know that the U.S. had troops in Africa until that time. And this is an African person, African descent going and, doing something that exposes his interest. Now, this is also a class war, because it's only the working class people who are having to be in a position, whether you're employed or not, to sell our wages to capitalists. So that's the working class. It doesn't matter whether you have a job or not. That's how I define it, right? And so these are, anyway, so that's so we have to begin, and just to get to the exigencies, that part of our movement is a consciousness raising thing, We hope we can take advantage of consciousness that emerged and the resistance around the movement for Black Lives, which is looking at the police assault on us, and that's kind of diminishing, but we want to revitalize that. And then we want to make it more sophisticated so that we're connecting the militarization of police and militarizations in our communities with what's happening on the continent of Africa. And then connecting that with the total pro-peace, anti-war, anti-imperialism. And we also need to connect imperialism and anti-imperialism and war. You know, they're inextricably, if there's wars because there's imperialism, and people think of that as a very, you know, it's a rhetorical catchword, but we have to study capital and whatnot. But we have to wage this ideological battle as well, and raising the consciousness of our people so that our movements are not just, when we're mobilizing in the street, not just moving against what the police are doing to us locally, but linking that and making that inseparable from the movements to demilitarize the world. Amen. Thank you. Amen.
Thank you, Michael. Thank you very much. Next is Angela Bibbins Henry. She's a Santee Dakota descendant, former ground coordinator and founding member of the Water Protector Legal Collective, where she spent 6 months providing legal support services for the defense of water protectors in North Dakota. Angela is also the founder of Red Owl Law, an indigenous-focused law firm in Aurora, Colorado. She's a 2006 graduate of the University of Denver Sturm College of Law, and admitted to practice in Colorado state courts, federal courts in Colorado and North Dakota. Angela has experience in environmental and criminal defense law, movement support, expertise in the Indian child welfare and juvenile law as well. Please welcome Angela Bibbins Henry.
Mahamitaki ape, ampetu washte, chamte washte, nape, natuzi ape. Angela Bibbins washichu, imanchi ape, heshka adwati, damakota iaska. My relatives, I greet you with a warm heart and a happy handshake. I said in my language in Dakota that I am Angela Bibbins Henry, and I am Dakota, and I'm mixed blood. I am Ieska, that's our word. It means translator as well. And so it is literally the position that I occupy in my culture and in this society, of being at the intersection of race, culture, sovereignty, socioeconomic background. And I'll trace a little bit about my own personal family history, because it is important, because it's a history that has been suppressed in this country. I wear the face of the colonizer, and that is by design of federal policy. And I just want to let that sit with everybody for a moment, because I am a descendant of the 38 Dakotas who were hung at Mankato, Minnesota in 1862 by the decree of President. Trace that back for a few minutes, because that is how we got to Standing Rock. My tribe was not a signatory to the 1868 Fort Laramie Treaty. The treaty had first been attempted in 1851. My original homelands are in Minnesota, and I joke, with a little bit of levity, that if I were to be granted my homelands again, it would be the Mall of America. In all seriousness, we are people who are connected to the land. This land is where we find our medicine. This land is where we find our sustenance, our food, our shelter, our clothing, all of our ceremonies. We are people, we're star people. This was a gift from my dad. This is who we are, where we come from, and where we return when we make our journey on the Star Road to the Star Camp when we are done with this material world. And so I just want to relate to you what it is that we were doing in our fight to protect our land at Standing Rock. The sacred sites, we are people to to reflect what we see in the sky. And that is what was destroyed on the first day, and I think that there are people here who were there and stood with us in solidarity, and I want to thank you for that. The day that the sacred sites were destroyed on September 3rd when the dog bite attacks occurred. And what had happened before that, my uncle, Dakshi Timmons, who was the previous Tribal Historic Preservation Officer for Standing Rock, had mapped out those sacred sites. His life's work is to protect and preserve our sacred sites throughout the Northern Plains. And he had given that map to Earth Justice attorneys. They had filed it with the court here in DC to be able to demonstrate the harm that could be done. Well, the corporation, Dakota Access Pipeline, took that map and they, on a holiday weekend, diverted all of their resources from where they had been building the pipeline further north to closer to camp, exactly where those sites were, so that they could run bulldozers through our ancestors' graves and destroy those effigies of the star constellations on the ground. It was a spiritual war that continues to this day. My grandfather, my great-great-grandfather, Patrick Henry, was one who made the long journey from Mankato, Minnesota, Fort Snelling, prisoner of war. They marched them. This is our Trail of Tears. You don't know about Santee people's Trail of Tears, right? Because there were so few of us. Only 400 adults made it over a course of 3 years from one camp to another camp, finally across the Missouri River to Nebraska, northeast Nebraska, and Ponca territory, where my reservation has been for over the last 100 years. When I went to my reservation last month for one of the first times in over a decade, because I was not raised with my culture. My white mother left my father when I was 9 months old. I have spent the last 15 years trying to discover my truth as my consciousness keeps evolving into my identity. The intentional erasure of us. This is the genocide that is perpetrated against tribal people on this continent, in our own country. That we will be erased. I was the perfect result of these policies of boarding school, of war, of adoption out of our children to white families, being raised by white parents, intermarriage, the removal of us from our homelands to urban centers. This is all part of acts of genocide to exterminate us. I did not agree. And so I have asserted against the invasion of a corporation which was defended by the utilization of the police. We had dark sites. We had people who worked for more than 24 hours, who were injured at the front lines, who were chained to hospital beds. There was COINTELPRO activities going on. They put an informant in with my sister Red Fawn, planted a gun on her, and now she is serving 5 years in federal prison. This is an ongoing war, and we do need help with this struggle. We cannot do this alone. Intersectionality is the only way that we are going to prevail in any kind of peace in our homes. That's why I'm here today, to make my plea for my people, that we continue as allies to continue educating yourself about the history of your own government here at home, so that we can fight these wars, so that my relatives don't have to go off to foreign wars because of poverty, because we are working class, because that's the only option that we have other than what is going on with meth, the epidemic of meth on our reservations, the epidemic of poverty, the epidemic of lack of access, and what is going on in this administration right now is an ongoing genocide in trying to remove those entitlements, not a benefit, entitlement given in exchange, health and education in exchange for land and resources. So with that, I want to thank you. Wopila Tonka.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Our next speaker, Sherry Honkala, drove down from Philadelphia this morning with her crew. She's a longtime anti-poverty advocate, co-founder of the Kensington Welfare Rights Union, and co-founder of the National Coordinator for the Poor People's Economic Human Rights Campaign. She ran for vice president in 2012 with Jill Stein and has run for other offices as a Green Party candidate. She's organized numerous protests, marches, demonstrations, sit-ins. She's set up tent cities, and she's taken over abandoned buildings. She fights against poverty, foreclosures, evictions, and homelessness. In the course of all these activities, Sherry has been arrested for civil disobedience more than 200 times. Please welcome Sherry Honkala.
Okay, another woman from Minnesota. I want to start out because I only have like 8 minutes and I have a whole lot to say. And I'm standing up. Well, I would stand up anyways, but I had 2 major surgeries and a lot of love to people that sent me a lot of love because it's been a rough month. But I promised Galen I would say his name, so Galen, okay, the name's over with now. And Bruce, Pastor Keith, and Ernest. Okay, if you want to pass out the graphics to each side of the room while I got my 8 minutes. Because I think that when you talk about the war at home, it's really important to visualize. Although we have photographs of Brazil, Africa, other parts of the world, this is North Philly, where we currently do a bulk of our work. And what they are is they're homeless encampments and stuff where people are living outside. So